Somewhere in Los Angeles, while the city slept peacefully behind locked doors, a shadow moved silently through the night. No one saw him arrive. No one heard him leave. But by morning, another family would wake up to horror. Police had no face, no name, only a terrifying nickname whispered across the city, the Night Stalker. And the truth behind that name was more disturbing than anyone could imagine. Long before the name Night Stalker terrified California, there was just a boy named Richard Ramirez. He was born on February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas. From the outside, his childhood looked ordinary. But inside the Ramirez household, life was far from peaceful. Richard grew up in a strict family environment where anger and violence were never far away. His father had a violent temper, and discipline often came in the form of harsh punishment. For young Richard, fear became normal. But the most dangerous influence in his life came from someone else entirely: his older cousin. The cousin had recently returned from serving in the Vietnam War. At first, Richard admired him. He seemed strong, fearless, almost heroic. But the stories he told were not heroic at all. They were stories of violence, stories of torture, stories that should never have been shared with a child. And Richard listened to every word. Sometimes his cousin even showed him photographs from the war. Images of brutality, images that slowly began shaping the mind of a young boy who was already struggling to understand the world. Then one night, everything changed. Richard watched as his cousin shot and killed his own wife during an argument. The violence happened right in front of him. For most children, such an event would leave deep trauma. But for Richard, something darker began to grow. As Richard grew older, his behavior became more disturbing. He started spending time alone, drifting further away from normal life. School no longer interested him. Instead, he became fascinated by darker things. He began exploring ideas about evil and rebellion. Eventually, he developed a strong interest in Satanism, not as a philosophy, but as an identity. He began wearing dark clothing, listening to heavy music, and embracing symbols meant to shock and disturb others. But the darkness inside him continued to grow. At 22 years old, Richard moved to Los Angeles. At the time, Los Angeles was a city full of dreams, but it was also a place where someone could disappear into the crowd, and that is exactly what Richard Ramirez did. He drifted from place to place, sleeping wherever he could, sometimes in cheap hotels, sometimes on the streets. He had no real job, no real direction, but inside his mind, dangerous thoughts were slowly taking shape. In 1984, a series of disturbing crimes began happening across Los Angeles. At first, police didn't realize the cases were connected. The attacks happened late at night. Victims were chosen randomly. Homes were broken into quietly while families slept. The attacker moved like a ghost. He entered silently and disappeared before anyone could stop him. At first, investigators believed they were dealing with different criminals, but then patterns began to appear. Windows were often left unlocked. Victims were attacked in their bedrooms, and strange symbols sometimes appeared at crime scenes. Fear began spreading through neighborhoods. People started locking their windows, installing stronger doors, buying guard dogs. But none of it seemed to stop the attacks. Whoever was responsible moved like a shadow through the city, and the media soon gave him a name: the Night Stalker. By 1985, panic had spread across Southern California. The attacks became more frequent, more unpredictable, and the victims seemed completely random. Young, old, men, women, no one felt safe. People began sleeping with lights on. Gun sales increased across the region. Neighborhood watch groups formed overnight. Parents warned their children not to open windows. And every strange sound in the night became terrifying. The Night Stalker could strike anywhere, and he did. He moved between cities across California, breaking into homes in the middle of the night, sometimes through unlocked doors, sometimes through open windows. Police were chasing a ghost. There were very few clues. Witnesses described a tall man with dark eyes, but the descriptions varied. The attacker left almost nothing behind. For months, the investigation seemed hopeless. But one small clue would finally change everything. At one crime scene, investigators found a single footprint. It came from a very unusual type of sneaker. The shoe was called Avia, and it was rare. Detectives realized something important. If they could track down who owned that shoe, they might finally find the Night Stalker. Police released the information to the public. Soon, newspapers and television broadcasts spread the word. The mysterious killer had left behind a rare footprint, and now the entire city was watching. Then another clue appeared. During one attack, the suspect had stolen a car. Days later, the vehicle was found abandoned. Inside it, investigators discovered a fingerprint. That fingerprint would soon change everything. Police ran it through the criminal database, and finally, they had a name: Richard Ramirez. When police released his photo to the public, something incredible happened. People across Los Angeles began recognizing the face. The Night Stalker had been walking freely through the city the entire time. But now everyone knew what he looked like, and the public was ready. On August 31st, 1985, Ramirez returned to Los Angeles after traveling to Arizona. He stepped off a bus, completely unaware that his face was now on every newspaper, every television station, every police bulletin. Within minutes, people around him began whispering. They recognized him. Someone shouted, "That's him." Ramirez panicked and ran, but this time the city fought back. Residents chased him through the streets. Several people tackled him, others held him down, and finally police arrived. After months of terror, the Night Stalker was captured. Ramirez's trial began in 1988. It quickly became one of the most infamous trials in American history. The courtroom was packed every day. Journalists, curious citizens, families of victims, and even strange supporters who became obsessed with him. Ramirez showed no remorse. He often smiled in court. Sometimes he even raised his hand in a symbol linked to Satanism. At one point, he told the court that people were afraid of things they did not understand. His behavior shocked everyone in the courtroom, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. Fingerprints, witness testimony, physical evidence. One by one, survivors described the terrifying nights when the Night Stalker entered their homes. The jury listened for months, and in the end, the verdict was clear: guilty. After the trial, Ramirez was sent to death row in San Quentin State Prison. For decades, he remained there while appeals continued through the legal system. But in 2013, the story finally came to an end. Richard Ramirez died in prison from health complications. He was 53 years old. And with his death, one of the darkest chapters in California's criminal history finally closed. But the fear he created, the sleepless nights, the city that once lived in terror, would never completely forget the name. Even today, decades later, people still remember the summer when Los Angeles couldn't sleep. Doors were locked, windows were checked twice, and every sound in the darkness felt like a warning. Because somewhere in the night, a stranger could be watching, waiting, moving silently through the shadows, and the city would forever remember the man who turned the night itself into something terrifying. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker.